Green paint, dulled by 14 years of Paris weather. A big 289 under the hood, built by a specialist who never once thought about cameras, tuned for one man's own driving pleasure and nobody else's. A quiet street in the 14th arrondissement. No reason for anyone outside that garage to know this car existed. That's not how movie Mustangs usually start. Most of the famous ones are built for the studio, on the studio's schedule, purpose-made for a shot list and nothing else. Assembled to spec, driven for 6 weeks, then parked in a lot somewhere until someone decides what to do with them. This one wasn't. This one belonged to a man named Jean-Michel Brault, who bought it in the spring of 1971 because he liked fast cars and had it built up because he liked driving them faster. Then a stunt team needed a Mustang, and somebody remembered this one existed. And to get the shot they actually wanted, they didn't touch Brault's car at all at first. They built a second one instead, visually identical, mechanically simpler, whose entire purpose from day one was to not survive the shoot. Before we get into what happened to both of them, subscribe to Retro Real Rides. Every week, we go past the poster and the trailer and into the paperwork, the owners, and the actual fate of the vehicles that made these scenes work. This one has a twist most people who've seen the film. The film is Le Marginal, released in French cinemas on 26 October 1983. 5 million tickets sold, a genuine event picture for its year. Jean-Paul Belmondo plays Commissaire Philippe Jourdan, a cop whose methods cause his superiors nearly as much trouble as the criminals he's chasing. Jacques Deray directs. Michel Audiard writes dialogue sharp enough that lines from it are still quoted by French audiences decades later. Audiard was, by this point in his career, one of the most recognizable voices in French popular cinema, a screenwriter whose dialogue could get a film talked about independent of its plot. Being the person international productions called when a sequence had to look impossible and still be safe enough to execute on a real schedule, in real streets, Belmondo himself had built a career, by this point, on insisting on doing exactly that, his own stunts, his own driving, no visible cutaway to somebody else's hands on the wheel. Pairing him with Julienne's team wasn't incidental casting, it was the entire engine of what made a Le Marginal-style action sequence credible to a 1983 French audience. Julienne's brief for the centerpiece chase was specific. Build something that could stand next to Steve McQueen's sequence in Bullitt, dark green paint, a lowered stance, fenders flared wide enough to swallow serious rubber, side exhaust open enough to be heard 3 streets over before the car ever came into frame. None of that was incidental. It was the entire design brief worked out before a single foot of film was shot. Here's where the specifics get interesting and where the record gets a little contested. Brault's car is documented on French auction paperwork under chassis number 7T01A120268, first road registered on the 5th of December and described there as a 1966 Mustang Coupe. 2 photos of the car in its pre-filmed state survive in the sale file, credited to Bernard Afchain, who maintained the car for Brault before it was ever near a film set. A small detail, but it's part of why this car's paper trail is unusually solid for a movie vehicle. Other sources, including some English-language film vehicle databases, list it as a 1967, and at least one outlet has described it as a Shelby GT500 running a 428. Both versions are out there in circulation. The chassis registration is the stronger documentary evidence. It comes straight off the car's own paperwork. But the discrepancy has never been definitively resolved across every source that's written about this car, and it's more honest to say so than to pick a number just to sound certain. What isn't contested is the engine. Brault had his 289 built by a specialist named Michel Brault, purely for his own enjoyment, years before any film crew came looking for a Mustang. That engine, not a studio spec sheet, not a prop house rental, not anything assembled to a production's timeline, is what ended up carrying Belmondo through Paris on camera. It's worth sitting with that for a second. The car people remember from this film was, mechanically, already exactly what it needed to be before anyone involved in making Le Marginal had ever heard of it. Julienne's team didn't stop at borrowing Brault's car, though. For a sequence this demanding, one Mustang wasn't going to be enough, not with a real actor behind the wheel and real Paris streets to shoot in more than once across multiple takes and multiple angles. So they built a second car, dressed to match Bro's, running a stock engine instead of his built one, specifically so that Bro's own car would never have to be the one that got wrecked if something went wrong. One Mustang was going to carry the film star through 4 minutes of real streets at real speed. The other existed for exactly one reason: to take the hit the first one couldn't afford to. The sequence runs close to 4 minutes, landing at roughly the 78th minute of the film. Jourdan behind the wheel chasing a pair of criminals through a Plymouth Volare, through Aubervilliers, and across the 19th and 13th arrondissements of Paris. This wasn't a closed studio backlot dressed to look like a city. It was the actual city, actual traffic patterns, actual intersections that a production had to negotiate access to and then shoot fast enough not to lose the light or the permits. Belmondo did his own driving. That wasn't a novelty by 1983. It was practically expected of him by that point in his career, part of what audiences were paying to see. But it meant Julienne's team had to hand a working actor, not a professional stunt driver, a car that could take real streets at real speed more than once, with no stunt double's polish available to paper over anything that went wrong on camera. Every flared arch, every inch of lowered stance, every pound shaved or added to that car existed to make that arrangement survivable as well as dramatic. The result became one of the sequences French audiences remember the film for most. Not the plot, not even Belmondo's performance in it, but 4 minutes of a green Mustang doing something French action cinema hadn't fully attempted before, answering an American car chase on its own terms, on real Paris pavement without pretending to be anywhere else, and without hiding behind a stunt double to get there. The stunt car did exactly what it was built to do. It went into the chase, absorbed whatever the sequence demanded of it, and afterward, it was scrapped, quickly, without ceremony. It had one job, and the job ended the moment the cameras stopped rolling. Nobody was ever going to preserve a car that existed purely to be sacrificed, and nobody did. Brault's car, the one carrying his own engine, the one that had a life before any of this, the one Bernard Offchain had been quietly maintaining before a film crew ever knew it existed, should have had a better ending. For a long time, it didn't. After filming wrapped, it went to the property of Joe Cote, a member of Julienne's crew, and it stayed there. Not preserved, not stored under cover, just parked, exposed to weather and years, and the particular kind of neglect that happens when nobody's actively choosing to destroy something, but nobody's choosing to save it either. That's often the more dangerous fate for a vehicle like this. Not a dramatic ending, just a slow one, unfolding in a yard nobody was paying attention to. Eventually, Cote had it hauled toward a scrapyard. The car that had survived the chase, the one built well enough, driven carefully enough to make it through 4 minutes of real Paris streets with its star behind the wheel, came within a decision or two of not surviving the years that followed it. An enthusiast pulled it out before that happened in what's described as dilapidated condition, paint gone, none of the presence left of the machine that had chased a Plymouth Volare through the 19th arrondissement. It changed hands again from there to its current owner, a committed Belmondo admirer who took on a full ground-up reconstruction. No shortcuts by his own account, working to return the car to exactly what audiences saw on screen. The flared arches, the open side exhaust, the plexiglass roof insert, added originally for no reason other than to let a camera see inside the cabin during the chase, now rebuilt as a piece of screen-accurate history rather than a practical necessity. The car that exists today is that reconstruction. In February 2023, it crossed the block at Art Curial's Retromobile sale in Paris, estimated between 200,000 and 400,000 euros. It didn't sell. As of a more recent listing, it's back on the market, fully restored, completely present, and still without a permanent home. Its twin has been gone for over 40 years, scrapped within days of finishing the one job it was built for. This one is still deciding where it ends up decades after it should have already been decided. If you're looking at what it would take to get close to this car today, either to own something built in its spirit or to understand exactly what you're looking at if you ever encounter the genuine article, a few things are worth knowing, both on the build side and the market side. The 289 small block is the mechanical heart of what made this car work on camera and it remains one of the most approachable classic Ford V8s to source parts for and build properly today. A healthy specialist and parts economy exists around it in a way that isn't true of every era-correct engine option. What's harder to replicate with real authenticity is everything Julienne's team did to the body. The flared fenders, the dropped stance, the side exit exhaust routing, none of that came from the factory. All of it is achievable now through the same category of aftermarket fender flare kits and suspension components period tuners were already using in the early 80s. This was aggressive, competent bodywork, not exotic fabrication, and a builder working today has more off-the-shelf options for replicating it than Julienne's crew did originally. The one detail that's genuinely difficult to replicate with real accuracy is the plexiglass roof section, cut in specifically to solve a camera problem during production. That's a filming-specific modification, not something you'd want on a car you actually drive daily. But it's the detail that separates a faithful tribute build from a merely similar-looking one for anyone who cares about getting it exactly right rather than approximately right. On the market side, base 1966 to 1967 Mustang coupes in decent driver condition remain one of the more accessible entry points into American classic muscle, with project cars available well below what a numbers-matching or documented example commands. What sets a car like this one apart isn't the base platform, it's the documented, chassis-verified connection to a specific film and a specific stunt production, which is exactly the kind of provenance that's impossible to manufacture after the fact. That's also why an unsold 200,000 to 400,000 euro estimate isn't necessarily a sign the market rejected the car. Specialty film provenance vehicles can sit through more than one sales cycle before the right buyer steps forward, particularly when the story behind the car is this specific. Somewhere between a quiet street in the 14th arrondissement and an unsold lot at a Paris auction house, this car did the one thing its twin never got the chance to do. It came back from being ordinary, then from being forgotten, then very nearly from being scrap, surviving the exact fate it was built to risk. Not once, but twice. It's sitting somewhere right now, fully restored, completely real, and still waiting for someone to decide what happens to it next.